I want to welcome you all to a very special webinar tonight. It's going to be on natural self-care for those working with vulnerable victims of crime, but really for anyone working in careers and jobs or even volunteer work that are very stressful. So my name is Ali Phillips. And let me just tell you a little bit about me. So I have spent the last 23 years of my career in the world of criminal prosecution and educating prosecutors, criminal justice professionals, law enforcement, child protection, animal protection. And it hasn't been easy work for those of you who are in those fields. And I would encourage you to type in the chat and let me know where you work and what sort of work you do. But my career has been focused from the start on helping vulnerable victims of crime. So animals, children, elderly, domestic violence victims. And over the years, I stopped being a prosecutor, but ended up for the past 14 years teaching criminal justice professionals. I am also the founder and the former director of the National Center for Prosecution of Animal Abuse, which is with the National District Attorneys Association outside of DC. And I'm also the founder of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, which is the only global initiative working directly with domestic violence shelters to build on-site pet kennels so that families fleeing violence can bring their pets with them. And I'm also the co-founder of Therapy Animals Supporting Kids to help put therapy animals with children going through the court system. But I've been in this world for a very long time. I've been a longtime animal shelter volunteer and animal advocate, as well as vulnerable victim advocate, because of my work starting off as a prosecutor. And all of this work ended up with me suffering from chronic trauma, because while I was a prosecutor, I started volunteering at my local animal control shelter. I actually thought that that would be a way of de-stressing, and it ended up being as stressful as the work that I was doing as a felony trial prosecutor. And it was because of the shelter environment, and not just because they had a high euthanasia rate, but also because they were selling the animals to research, which after 3 years of advocacy and a lot of trauma, we ended that practice and pretty much ended it in the state of Michigan, which is why I wrote the only book on the topic, as you see on the screen, the book called How Shelter Pets Are Brokered for Experimentation. But just all working long hours as a prosecutor, dealing with, the worst of humanity in that career, volunteering at the animal shelter, trying to save the shelter animals from being sold to research. It really took its toll on me. And I physically and emotionally collapsed from all of that, especially when all of my animal advocacy work resulted in me having to leave my work in prosecution. So it's all resulted in basically two of my worlds coming together, because after moving from Michigan out to the DC area and working extensively in the field of criminal prosecution education, I also became aware of energy healing and natural methods to really help heal the body, mind, and spirit. And I ended up opening a business in 2011 called Manifested Harmony. So this is really a blend of everything coming together. And while it took me years to recover, it did happen. And that's why I like talking about this topic, because there are solutions out there. So, it's okay to admit that you have dark days. We really need to move beyond the outward appearance of strength and to be honest when we're struggling, because if we bottle it up, it eventually will come out and it's not going to be pretty. I mean, it could be so destructive that you lose your job, your friends, your family, your marriage, your health. People do terrible things to animals, to children, to people, and it's okay to get angry. My philosophy is it's better out than in. So it's okay to admit that you get angry. It's okay to admit that you want to hurt people who hurt animals and children and other victims. And I see it on Facebook every day where people want eye for an eye, and you've likely wanted that too. It's okay to admit that you have far too many days where you go home depressed, despondent, crying, feeling immobilized. Maybe you feel suppressed or oppressed by the system, or disagree with your colleagues, or disagree with agency policies. It's okay to admit that you can't take it anymore, that you just can't handle one more day, yet you keep going for whatever reason. It's okay to admit that you need help. Because if you can't admit that you need help, it's only going to compile and get worse. And so I want to talk about the energy of trauma. So everyone processes stress and trauma differently, but one thing in common is that trauma has an energy to it that invades our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies. These are actual layers around our body. And some people are more empathetic than others, so they feel the energy of trauma even more strongly. People who are drawn to help animals and children and other vulnerable populations are often very empathetic, and they feel things much more strongly than other people. And we often see this when we're upset over how an animal or a person has been treated, and other people don't understand why we're getting so upset or what the big deal is. The energy of what a victim experiences, if we are working with them, it sticks to us. The energy of our coworkers, who also may be struggling, sticks to us. The energy of the offenders sticks to us. The energy of the system sticks to us. Everything that we experience throughout our day, everything that is said, everything that we see, comes in to our energy. So no wonder we feel so down and depressed. We have to process this energy, otherwise we could get sick, or we could just leave doing this really important work. And no matter what area you're in, we can't afford to lose good workers. So the photo that you see on your screen is actually, it's actually been measured. It's a magnetic energy field that surrounds the body. And some people call it an aura. But it is this magnetic energy field that connects everything in our body. It connects our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual state. Think about it this way. Have you ever been so emotionally upset that you felt sick to your stomach? Or you were so emotionally distraught about something that your heart just physically hurt? That's how these energy layers work. They're all connected through energy channels. It's how acupuncture works. They work on these energy channels. And so when we start thinking about physical disease, when you break it down, is dis-ease. The body is not at ease because of emotional trauma, mental trauma that is going on. And so this is just a very short primer to help you understand that everything is energy, and trauma does have an energy to it. So I sent everyone an email today that contained 2 assessments for you to take. And I would love to know what your scores are if you want to type those in the chat. And for those who are listening to the recording, I will make sure that you have these so that you can take them. But the first one is called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. And this is a a scale that I adapted specifically to those working with animals, but whether you work with people or animals, this is a very good scale for you to take. And the second one is called the Self-Care and Life Balance Inventory. And what these are doing are telling you where you're at right now so that you know what to work on. Because if you don't know where you score, it's hard to take the next step. So let me give a comparison because I'm going to share my numbers with you. So the first time I took both of these was back in June of 2014. So gosh, that's almost 3 years ago when I really started working on this topic. And in the professional quality of life scale, there are 3 areas being scored: compassion, satisfaction, burnout, and secondary trauma. I scored a 35 on compassion satisfaction, which was average, which showed me that I was starting to lose some compassion. And this was at the height when I was living outside of Washington, D.C. and traveling all over the place, teaching and training and working on these cases. So these numbers don't surprise me. My burnout score was 33, which was average, which meant I was just literally teetering on the fence. And my secondary trauma score was 35, which again was average, which meant I was teetering on the fence. I can almost guarantee you that had I took this when I was a prosecutor, I would have had the absolute bottom of the barrel scores. I know it. Well, I took the test again today. And, let me go back. On the self-care and lifestyle balance inventory, I scored a 76, which was pretty good for self-care because I was already starting to do everything that I'm going to talk to you about. Now, let's fast forward to today. So for the first scale, for compassion satisfaction, I was a 35. Today, I'm a 47. That is much better. 3 years ago, on burnout, I was a 33. Today, I'm a 24. That is much better because the lower, the better on that one. 3 years ago on secondary trauma, I was a 35. Today, I'm a 27. Much better. And then on the self-care inventory, I'm the same because I'm utilizing the same steps that I'm going to be talking about. So I encourage you to really take this test and take it as often as you want. I take it about twice a year. So let me talk about the various types of stress that we can encounter in our work. There's no difference whether you are paid or you're a volunteer working with vulnerable victims because you handle cases and situations every day, and everyone can suffer because everyone responds differently. So vicarious trauma is secondhand exposure to trauma because you care. Some people are more empathetic than others. They can energetically take on the pain and trauma of others and just can't seem to let it go. These are the people with big hearts. They envision and dwell upon the situation of what it must have been like for the vulnerable victim, and they can end up having nightmares. They literally take on the trauma and physically feel it. This happens over time. It's often not just one event. So if this is you, you may end up working more to combat the trauma of the vulnerable victim. And it's really important to shift and focus on survival or ending the suffering rather than visualizing it. Now, when we go to compassion fatigue, this is where you feel exhausted, being surrounded by suffering and trauma. You feel helpless and hopeless, and you begin to isolate yourself as a coping mechanism. You care so much that it's draining you. You have emotional exhaustion from observing suffering, and you feel helpless. And then there's burnout. This is physical and emotional exhaustion resulting from chronic stress. And the chronic stress can come from unrealistic expectations of what you're doing, being poorly matched to a position, too much challenge or too much boredom, lack of appreciation by your boss, dealing with difficult coworkers, and lack of control over situations. Now, you notice that these typically have nothing to do with vulnerable victims themselves, but more about the situation that you're in. And it's the people around that can actually cause you to suffer from burnout. So Elizabeth Strand is the founding director of the University of Tennessee's Veterinary Social Work program, and this quote really sums it up, that one of the hallmark signs of compassion fatigue is that you cannot undo what you've been exposed to, and your worldview is forever changed. You can't unsee it, you can't unhear it, you can't unknow it. And I have done this presentation many times in person for animal shelters, and I am now expanding it to prosecutors and law enforcement and child protection professionals. But what really prompted me to do this webinar tonight is a case from a few weeks ago on March 9th of a precious little cat named Sage out of Utah. And I'm not going to go into the details of what happened, but that photo was accidentally taken of me when I was processing what happened to this cat. My cat, Lucy, walked across my keyboard, and I had an application on my computer open that takes pictures, and it was very serendipitous that my computer took this picture of me because it demonstrated what I was going through reading about what happened to this cat. And so it's a good segue into what are the physical signs of stress. And when I use the word stress, I'm talking about vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. So are you currently experiencing exhaustion, insomnia, headaches, or getting sick more than usual? Your job could be making you sick, and that's a physical sign of stress. Do you feel exhausted when you start your day? Are you dragging your feet through the day? Coming back to work after a weekend off, but you're still physically drained? Are you having trouble sleeping even though you're exhausted? You're wired and tired. Are you getting sick more often? Are the emotions that you're feeling causing physical illness? Stress begins to deplete your body, especially your adrenal glands, which are your fight or flight glands, because they're flooding your body with stress hormones to help you cope. It then impacts your brain, and you struggle to make good decisions. So when the adrenals are overproducing, they can become fatigued. And when you have adrenal fatigue, you are wired and tired. And this can impact all your other glands, your thyroid. So many people have thyroid disorders. You need to look at the adrenals. Pituitary, if you're having sleep disorders, need to look at the adrenals. And I know because I've been there. Now let's talk about the behavioral signs of stress. When we're suffering from stress, we often turn to things to help us feel better, things outside of ourselves, things that give us comfort. I admit that a bag of organic cheese popcorn or a big plate of mashed potatoes is my crutch. That is my comfort food. But there are other signs of behavioral stress that are not healthy. And so being really honest with yourself is going to give you a window into knowing where you are. Are you numbing yourselves with drugs or alcohol? And I'm not even talking illegal drugs. I'm talking Tylenol PM, sleep aids, Lunesta, other even prescribed drugs that help take the edge off of what you're doing. Are you running to alcohol as soon as you get home from work because you had a tough day? Are you taking a lot of mental health days and having absenteeism at work? Do you have a hair trigger on anger? Like the slightest thing sets you off? Do you keep yourself so busy that you avoid the issue and dealing with it? Are you having trouble making decisions? Are you losing friends and coworkers and becoming isolated because you feel so bad and it's all you can talk about, so no one wants to hang around you? Are you not as productive as you've been in the past? Are you actually thinking about quitting, or have you quit a job because you just didn't know how to process it? Now let's talk about the psychological signs of stress. These involve when you feel weighted down, you don't smile or laugh as often as you used to, you just want to go home and lock the door and crawl into bed. Those are signs of depression. You distance yourself from others because you're so down, because you know you don't have anything positive to talk about. And so you just isolate yourself. You feel badly about yourself for feeling this way, so you have a negative self-image, or you become numb to the trauma. You just don't have the sympathy or the empathy. So I want to stop on a side note there and talk about a situation when I was a prosecutor and why I did start volunteering at the animal shelter, which I was hoping would be a way to de-stress, but it ended up actually stressing me out even more. But why I did that was I was on call as a prosecutor, and I went to a homicide scene where a 16-year-old girl was killed in the driveway by her father. And he killed her because they were from a foreign country and she had the nerve, I say that sarcastically, to go out for ice cream with an American boy. And he killed her in the driveway. And when I saw her body, I had no reaction. And I knew that's when I was becoming too numb to the job. So if that is happening where you're not reacting emotionally, that is a psychological sign of stress. Are you negative and cynical about everything? Do you struggle to see the silver lining? Do you simply not want to go to work? Do you resent feeling this way? These are psychological signs of stress. Additional signs are, you just don't feel yourself. You don't feel that your work is bringing an end to the suffering. You don't feel that you're making a difference. You've lost interest in things that once brought you joy. You start to suffer from anxiety. Maybe you're having to be medicated for it, or you're more afraid of the world. You have scary dreams or intrusive imagery during the day. And this can happen from continuous exposure to crimes against animals and people. Maybe you have extreme emotions. You just can't control them. You're hypersensitive and can't seem to get that under control. You've lost hope that these vulnerable victims will ever be protected, and you wonder who's next. You can't leave your job in the workplace. You take it home with you. You can't let it go. And you just don't have the strength or the desire to have outside interests anymore. You isolate yourself. Now, I did want to touch upon, because this adds an additional layer for those of you working in animal shelters, or with homeless animals. When you are dealing with euthanasia, that adds an entirely different layer of stress to your life. And I wanted to put this in here because it is a hot topic. It always has been, and it will be for some time. No one ever gets involved in helping animals in order to end their life. No veterinarian, no animal shelter worker. I am friends with animal shelter workers and veterinarians, and it's so upsetting when they're called killers, because there's campaigns called no-kill campaigns to reduce the number of homeless pets. And we all want every pet to have a home. And they're great campaigns, but when we mudsling at each other in order to promote a cause, it ends up hurting the people, which ends up hurting the shelter, which ends up hurting the animals. And many of the animals in shelter have been abused and neglected. So, it's when you're dealing with end of life and the public perception, the public doesn't understand. And it's just being really careful when we call each other. And until you've been in this position, it's trying not to judge what's going on. So public perception can be really terrible on shelters. It's like you just can't do the right thing. And so you may end up struggling with depression and hopelessness, and even how you view humans. Your families may have trouble relating to you because of how you're struggling. It's draining when you're this compassionate. It's draining when you have to wake up and go to work and what awaits you. Because if a shelter is overfull, it is the sad reality, and you can become very hardened. And so what I talk to the shelters about is ways that you can handle the stress of this, if this is an unfortunate reality in your shelter, is to rotate the staff. If you have enough staff, try to rotate them. Find a way to have a counselor come to the shelter and talk to the staff. The day-to-day loss of life is enough to cause trauma and burnout. And there's always those situations where the staff and maybe the public become very invested in an animal that doesn't survive. And you need to bring help during those times. So setting up a support system for people to talk about how they're feeling and make it safe for them to do that. Because like I said at the beginning, better out than in. If you keep it in, it's just going to create problems. But it's also about investing resources to try to lower or end euthanasia in a very effective way. And, for those who are lost, it's finding meaning for those animals who need to be let go. And for those who work with other crime victims who are victims and they don't survive, it's finding the meaning in that so that you can keep going on. So let's talk about the stress of abuse and neglect, whether it's towards an animal or a person. Whether you're in an animal shelter or a domestic violence shelter or at the crime scene or in the courtroom or dealing, as an agency or an worker or an investigator, abuse and neglect is really tough, especially on those working this, and I train extensively on animal protection and child protection and domestic violence issues. And it's so interesting because everyone in these conference rooms tell me that they can handle seeing photos of abused children and adults during a conference, but they cannot handle seeing photos of abused animals. There is just something about the helplessness and the true innocence of that traumatizes people. So you can experience, a lack of compassion towards people because it's people who abuse and neglect animals and other people. We start to see the world as evil. If you just look on social media, there are countless stories every hour of animals in need. It's overwhelming. And you start seeing the eye for an eye articles and comments. We start to disconnect from humans and even disconnect from those who we are serving because we just can't seem to take it anymore. We can even start to disconnect from the animals. And we can go in the other direction and become very extreme in our behavior and sometimes engage in criminal behavior in order to try to right a situation. And so ways that you can handle this is, and this one's really tough because our gut reaction is to judge the person accused of harming someone, animal or person. And I see shelters and prosecutors and law enforcement and child and domestic violence protection workers trying their best every day to not judge. So regardless of your role, it's trying not to have that quick judgment. It's recognizing that because when you do that, you go into this downward spiral and it does not help that vulnerable victim who you are helping. It's letting the investigators figure out why something happened. Let the prosecutors take it into the courtroom and get the conviction or figure out what happened. And if you're working with the vulnerable victim, it's about channeling all of your energy and focus into that victim and helping them. Put your focus on them. For a prosecutor, I tell them, put your focus and your judgment on putting your case together and winning it. So it's really focusing on what you can do and not what you can't do. It's focusing on one animal and one person at a time and being thankful, for the animal victims and the child victims and the human victims who come to you. Be thankful that they came to you. That's what you can put your focus on. Now, we also have to deal with the stress of other people. So sometimes being around other people in our work or in our volunteer time can cause significant stress. So if you work or volunteer at an animal shelter, it can cause you stress when you see people surrendering animals. I've spent gosh, I don't know, 14, 15 years volunteering in shelters, and have had every excuse that you can imagine of why people were surrendering animals. And it's terrible when you see somebody surrender an 18-year-old cat. It's terrible. Or a 15-year-old dog, or a cat that no longer matches the curtains in their house. It can cause stress when you have to encounter people who are accused of or known to have harmed a vulnerable victim, a child, an adult, an elderly person, or an animal. Even being around coworkers can take its toll on you, because they can also be suffering. They can also be acting out. And then when friends and family don't want to hear the horrors of your work, you feel even more stressed and isolated. And so how do you handle the stress of other people? It's, again, being thankful. It's finding the gratitude that the people who surrendered an animal to you brought that animal to you, no matter what their condition is. Even if that animal does not survive, at least they were let go in the loving hands of people who care for animals. If it's a human, be thankful that they are now in your care, and you at least have a chance of helping them. It's about limiting time around coworkers who are suffering, who are negative. Treat them with kindness. Send them kindness. Think kind thoughts about them. But if you have to walk away, walk away. Walk away from hanging around the coffee pot, or the location where everybody hangs out and gossips and rips everybody apart and complains. Walk away from it, because how I talked about trauma has an energy, so does complaining, and it'll wear you down. And when it comes to friends and family, and they likely don't understand what you do and what you're going through, either talk to a professional, or get into like a work-related talk group. And so I also wanted to go into the characteristics of coping with trauma. So the 3 characteristics of coping with trauma are strength, having meaning and purpose, and pleasure in your life. That is what creates resilience in people. And so if you have these 3 characteristics, you naturally have the resilience that will help you in the workplace. And these 3 have to be experienced emotionally and cognitively in order to develop. So resilience comes from being surrounded by supportive people. And when we can put stress in perspective and not catastrophize it, our body can return to its natural state of wellness and heal itself. That's called allostasis. That's what we're supposed to be doing at night. So if you're not sleeping, you can't do that. And so when we believe in something more than ourselves, it can give us faith and hope that tomorrow will be a better day, and that you will be able to do better and do more and help someone else. In talking with, one of my friends is the former president of National Animal Care and Control Association. He currently heads an animal shelter in Ohio, and shared an article which is actually going to be listed as a resource for all of you to read. He talks about how he was gung-ho at the beginning of his career and was told that this would wear off. I know him well, and I can tell you, gosh, he is probably 30 years into his career in animal control. It is not worn off. And he credits it to being optimistic, even in the face of dark days. He is optimistic and he is forward thinking. He doesn't, as he says, I don't think outside the box. I erase the box. I don't accept any limitations. So it's being optimistic instead of dwelling on the problems, and focus on what you can do to make things better. Even if you're not the boss, there is something that you can do to make things better. And when you start the day and go through the day and end the day, filling your mind with thoughts of gratitude, you will be amazed at how resilient you are, because you are what you think. If you are consumed with negative thoughts, that is exactly how your life is going to show in front of you. But when you live in gratitude, It puts on different sunglasses. I mean, people actually say, oh, you're wearing rose-colored sunglasses. There is absolute truth to that. When you can get moving, that can help you cope with trauma and bring resilience to you. You know, I have this very hilarious and frankly bizarre practice where when I'm really stressed out, I will put on my 80s rock music. I go into my basement and I just aggressively dance it out. I'm talking like Jennifer Beals flash dance, like in a scary way. Physical movement does you good. So getting out and walking and running or whatever it takes, get moving. Get good sleep. So I like to point out the things that I did that were wrong because I didn't know. So for 3 years when I was a prosecutor and I was battling the animal shelter selling animals to research, I could only sleep if I took Tylenol PM for 3 years. No wonder my physical and emotional health collapsed. That is not recommended. So in order to get good sleep, you need to disconnect from technology 2 hours before you want to sleep. Take your television set out of your bedroom because it's the lighting and computers and cell phones and tablets and iPads and the flickering lights on a TV that trigger your brain to stay awake. So if you can remove all lighting, even a night light from your room, do it. I'm going to talk about some essential oils, but diffuse some lavender or spray lavender essential oils on your pillow, and that'll help you. What's also important is to eat healthy, like eat real food. It's easy when we are stressed to roll up to the drive-in or just grab prepackaged food. If food comes in a box or a bag, it's not food. It's actually chemicals that are all put together and passed off as food. If you look at the ingredients, it's shocking. But sometimes we're so busy and so traumatized that we don't look. So basically, don't eat crappy food. Eat healthy food. Things that grow, vegetables, fruit, that sort of thing. Nuts are really good for you. And then it's really important to have a spiritual practice that is true for you. Maybe it's praying or meditating or reading spiritual books, self-help books, or journaling. It's just doing something to get you basically out of your mind and into something bigger than you. So, how do you ask for help? How do you go to your boss and ask for help? Well, the big thing is early detection, which is why I wanted you all to take those 2 assessments. Because if you suspect that something is wrong, ask for help. If your boss can't help or doesn't help, go to someone else, even if it means going outside of your agency. Focus on daily successes, whatever those are. For every animal that is adopted, focus on that. For every child that is helped, for every adult that is helped, focus on that. When I was volunteering at the animal shelter and battling these, I don't have a nice word for them, battling these monsters who were selling the shelter animals to research, I did lose many. But what I focused on were the ones that I could save. And I still have the photo album to this day. And that fight was from 2000 to 2003. And I still have that photo album and I look at it because I look at all the animals that I saved, even though I lost some. But it's also recognizing that you're not helpless. Whatever changes you can make in the workplace or just for yourself, even in your mind, practicing gratitude, that's how you can help yourself. Also, stop the venting cycle. When you see people venting, walk away. Because that does have an energy to it and it'll drag you down. Another thing that you can do is no matter how upset or angry you are with somebody who has hurt an animal or a person, I'm not saying be kind to them, just be kind in general. Being kind and being compassionate has an energy to it. When somebody is angry and they get somebody else angry and then they get other people angry, that angry has an energy to it and it spreads out. We can actually see it throughout our world when there's outbursts of anger. When we practice kindness and gratitude always, we can shift that and actually have more kindness, which actually can prevent less crime from happening. It's also important to take breaks. Get up and walk away. Don't work through your lunch. Go home on time. Go outside. Take time every day for activities that do not involve work. So if you work with animals, do something every day, every week that doesn't involve animals. If you work with children, do something every day, every week that doesn't involve kids. The message is you need to escape and rest and play, because we get so busy adulting and trying to take care of everyone else that if we fall apart, who's going to do our great work? We got to keep ourselves going. So some additional ideas. So I've already talked about stepping away from those who vent. It's really important to avoid social discussions about animals or victims in your non-work hours. So schedule in that time where you don't talk about that. So that means creating a whole life, a whole set of friends who you don't talk about your job to. And especially if you can pick very upbeat, happy, positive people, that's who you want to hang around with. Don't read or watch anything traumatic. Read uplifting books, watch uplifting movies. I am a big fan of the Hallmark Channel. I am not going to watch CSI or Law and Order. No, that's hitting too close to home. I'm not going to watch Animal Cops, hitting too close to home. So you're going to watch me, watching Harry Potter and Hallmark movies and reading uplifting books. Watch and do things that make you laugh. Humor is excellent. Journaling your thoughts, if you want to write them out. Again, better out than in. Journal to get them out. Quiet your mind. Sometimes I say the word meditation and people just shut down. All it is just focusing on your breathing. Like mentally count to yourself the count of 4 as you breathe in, and then mentally count to 4 as you breathe out. And if you just focus on the numbers and breathing, you're meditating. That's all you need to do. And I already talked about eating healthy food, but what it is about leaving your work at work and being able to disconnect so that you can refresh and rejuvenate so you can go back and do the work another day. Also, no negative news, no social media. When you are really feeling down, especially if you're like me, my social media feed is full of animals, and that's how I found out about this cat Sage, and that just really hit me hard. And so I will take Facebook breaks. I will actually put on my Facebook page, I'm on a Facebook break. You're not going to see me on there. I don't watch the news, national news, because there's nothing that I can do. There's nothing that I can do. Don't watch it. It's really about getting into gratitude, focusing on yourself. It is not selfish, because if it's like what they say when you're on an airplane, you've got to put your mask on before you help anybody else. So if you are suffocating in trauma and compassion fatigue and burnout, you cannot help who you are hired or volunteering to help. So get yourself into gratitude. Have a gratitude practice. I like to write down, especially at the end of the day, 5 things that I'm grateful for that happen throughout the day. And if you can do it first thing in the morning, that gets you into a mindset that changes your energy. And you'll be very amazed at how well your day goes and how resilient you are. I've already talked about moving. So walking, running, exercising, dancing. Last month, for the first time in, oh goodness, I do not know how many years, 35 years, I went roller skating. My junior high roller skates fit. It was awesome because I needed that. I was so stressed out. And that's what I did. But you can also do calming things like go for a massage, do yoga, go for an energy healing session. If you've never had an energy healing session like Reiki or having somebody lay crystals on you, I mean, that's what I do. I'm a Reiki master teacher. I'm an advanced crystal master. You haven't lived until you've had that done. It is so amazing. I even do those sessions on animals, and even the most hyped up, crazy animal, I can get them purring and snoozing. It's so relaxing because it changes the energy of your body. Acupuncture changes the energy of your body because it works with energy meridians to release the energy. And then essential oils. I got to tell you, this in the last 4 years has hands down been my favorite. Not only for me, but even for the animals and the people that I work with. So I just want to talk real briefly about that. And I'd love to know, post in the chat if you've ever used essential oils, because when you smell, and I'm not talking essential oils that you buy in the stores, because those are not going to work at this level. You need a therapeutic grade essential oil to do this. But when you smell a therapeutic grade essential oil, it goes to the limbic region of the brain, which is where we store emotion. Scent can bring on emotions, process emotions, and help you clear out what emotions you no longer want. So I want you to think about something. Think of the last time you smelled something and it triggered a memory. So for me, anytime I smell rose, I think of my grandmother. It's not even conscious. It just happens because she used to wear a rose scented hand lotion. If you smell chocolate chip cookies or pancakes being made, or, turkey and stuffing, it takes you back to a time. This is how powerful scent is. And there's a lot of research that is being done on how we can use scent to process trauma. And it's not just for people, it's for animals. And I have seen some outrageously amazing results. I mean, just to digress for a minute, a couple weeks ago, I volunteer at the local Humane Society, and I was called in to bring my oils and help a dog who was so terrified. He was shaking so violently for 2 days that he physically made himself sick. And there was nothing medically wrong with him other than he was shaking. And that shows how the emotions can cause physical problems. And I took the oils that you see on the screen, I took those out, and the Valor oil is the oil of courage. I waved it in front of his nose, and 20 seconds later, he stopped shaking for the first time in 2 days. That's how you can release emotions. And when you can release the emotions, it provides a physical benefit to the body. So when you're emotionally distraught and traumatized, I mean, think about it. You have lower energy. You even have aches and pains. You just feel crappy. And these oils can help process the emotions, boost your energy, and give you vitality. And so I use, and this is not a sales pitch at all, okay? If you're interested, you can contact me, but I really want to give you what has helped me and why I now use this particular brand, because I used every brand on the market for 15 years and they never did anything. These work because you can ingest them, you can smell them, you can apply them topically, and they're safe for pets. Right now, that photo that you see on your screen, my cat Rudy is doing that right now. He's got his face stuck in my diffuser. These work on the physical, the emotional, and the mental wellness because they work at the cellular level. So when you use them every day, you're going to feel a difference. And I am on a mission to get these oils in every animal shelter, every animal rescue foster home, every domestic violence shelter, every child protection agency, every prosecutor's office, and every law enforcement agency, because I see how these work on processing trauma and negative emotions and making sure that you have the physical vitality to keep doing what you need to do. It is absolutely hands down my number one tool, and it works 100% of the time. It is awesome. And I'm going to give you some resources on this if you want to watch some more webinars. But now let's go to, if you are in a position of supervision, if you're a manager, if you're a director, how can you help staff that you see are struggling? The important thing is to address this at the first opportunity. When you notice somebody is struggling, don't assume that you know that people know how to handle this, that they know how to get themselves beyond compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma and burnout. Watch your staff and notice. Make it safe to report. Let them speak up. Avoid chronic venting. Let the staff know that they can vent to professionals. Let them know who they can vent to. And be positive with your coworkers. Negative energy drags down others, and then it's going to drag you down. So bring in counselors. Have a burnout buddy program where you pair up people. This is where you can identify somebody who is resilient and pair them with somebody who is not resilient and get them watching out for each other. Work in mental health days for times off. Be flexible about hours and time, because if you have difficult cases, you can't work them as much as you probably really need to. Give them time off, put multiple people on the difficult cases, try to spread out the work, switch up assignments for people who can move around, change them around, and then reward them. Recognize good staff and reward them. And it can simply be a certificate. It can have an ice cream party once a month. So when I worked, when I was in DC, I headed up the legislative office for the American Humane Association. And I would, company-wide, if I saw somebody doing really good work, I would give them this award. It was called the Smudgy Award, and it was based on a shelter cat that I rescued who had terrible seizures that were all emotionally based, and we ended up getting them resolved using a lot of energy techniques. But she was very resilient through all of it, and so the Smudgy Award was for people who were resilient because we did work on tough cases involving animals and kids. So something simple like that, people loved it. People were always asking me, hey, when am I getting a Smudgy Award? So you can do something simple like that. Because when you don't address this, and you don't address the trauma and the stress and the burnout in yourself or in your staff, you could experience high turnover, which then puts more stress on the staff because you have to fill that spot, and then you have to constantly train new people. And you could actually have trouble filling positions if you have high turnover, because other people may say, wow, there's a lot of turnover. There's something wrong. So, making sure that you address this is going to prevent a domino effect. And if you don't address it, you're going to struggle with low morale. And once morale plummets, it's easy to plummet and hard to raise back up. And when you're low at staff and you have low morale and everybody's on edge, you can't be innovative. So you lose opportunities to help the animals, to help the children, to help other vulnerable victims, because you're constantly in survival mode. And you're putting out fires. You're being reactive and not proactive. And then you can end up with more negative experiences with the community, because when you're reactive rather than proactive and you're so stressed out and putting out fires and spinning so many plates, you're going to make a mistake. And then the public perception of how you're doing could be negative, and it's easy to lose your reputation and so hard to gain it back. So are there people that are beyond recovery? I don't think so. But there are some people who are so hardened and so calloused and so indifferent, they need a very swift and strong intervention. And, what you want to do is really be on the lookout for anyone who has checked out. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it in their language that they're using, in the body language, the way they interact with the public and animals. you need to take immediate action. Give them a disability leave if you have to in order to help them. Because the goal is to get them back on board and to help them. Because when you have the right people working on these cases, whether you're a prosecutor, an investigator, a shelter worker, a veterinarian, a child protection worker, and you have people on staff who are suffering, it impacts the entire team. There are just some people who are not cut out for this, and that's okay. Reassign them or let them move on. And for others, give them a break and give yourself a break. It's important to get the right people on the bus. Otherwise, everyone suffers. So what do I do now? So my life is dramatically different. So I moved back to Michigan where I was a prosecutor. I left 11 and a half years in the very stressful DC area. So I made some very proactive changes knowing that it would be tough, but it would be beneficial in the long term for my health and well-being. And oh my goodness, has it ever been amazing. So I'm 2 years back in Michigan, still teaching prosecutors and child protection and animal protection, running my healing business. I have so many multi-careers going on right now. You think I would be stressed, but I'm not. Because I changed the energy in my house because I work out of my house. I'm sitting here with 2 cats in my office and essential oils diffusing, and I'm surrounded by crystals. And that's how I changed the energy in my house. And I ballroom dance. That has nothing to do with any of my work. I stay away from negative situations. I do not watch national news. Nothing I can do about it. I limit my time on social media. And these things have done amazing things for my health. And all the other things that I've talked about, I do. Many of them I do on a daily basis. Some of them I don't need on a daily basis. And by the way, that's just a picture of my fireplace mantle. You can see all those huge crystals there. I probably have about 500 pounds of crystals in my house, and they do change the energy because they give off a vibration, which has actually been scientifically measured. So just go get yourself a big crystal and you'll feel great. So I wanted to share with you some other online classes if you're interested in them. They're all on my YouTube page. Some of them are private, so you can only get to them through a link. So if you go into the chat that you should see on the right or the left side of your screen, there's a document that says click here to download a PDF. And that PDF has the slide in it so that you can type in those URLs. And for those watching the recording, you can just freeze the screen and type those in. But these are all online classes. A lot of them are private for my essential oil team, but I am offering them to you because I want to help. I want you to have those available. And then some other resources if you're really interested in learning more. The Headington Institute has some great articles that they wrote on self-care for humanitarian workers. The Figley Institute has great information. And then I mentioned an article from my friend who works in animal control. One of the links is there that you can certainly read about and read what he does. And so just wondering if there are any questions. If there are questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And if you're listening to the recording, you can type in the comments and I can answer your question that way. Or you can also, if you go back to the first screen, you can email me at Ali, A-L-L-I-E, at aliphillips.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you for listening very much. And I really hope this helps because it has certainly helped me. It's helped others that I've shared this with. And I'd love to hear back from you if you find something that works for you, because not one thing is going to help everybody, which is why I gave a variety. So thank you very much for tuning in. I deeply appreciate it. Take care.